Welcome to the June Coffee with a Clinician. I'm Clayton Powers, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. I'm a physical therapist specializing in the care of individuals with complex health conditions, and I'm also the education liaison at Bateman Horne Center. Before we begin, I want to thank the donors whose support makes our community programs like this possible. And also, I want to thank all of you who consistently show up and join with us. We hope these sessions are valuable to you, and we really do listen to your feedback. For this session, Dr. Melanie Hoppers, Amy Mooney, Melinda Maxwell, and Jamie Booz will discuss Section 4 of the Clinical Care Guide titled Post-Exertional Malaise. And we're going to focus on Sections 6 and 7 regarding management of post-exertional malaise and answer other questions that participants have written in the Q&A feature. As a reminder, we can't provide any medical advice. And this is going to be a really interesting and exciting topic because managing post-exertional malaise is so important. And if more people can better manage the crashes, it's a lot easier to function. And so I'm excited for today's discussion. We have Dr. Melanie Hoppers. She's a board certified internal medicine and pediatrics BHC medical provider. And Dr. Hoppers also has family living with ME/CFS. Amy Mooney is an occupational therapist and mother to a young woman who has had severe ME/CFS for several years. And then Melinda Maxwell is a doctor of physical therapy who was diagnosed with ME/CFS and POTS in 2001. And Jamie Booz is a speech language pathologist at the University of Utah Long COVID Clinic and has lived experience with long COVID ME/CFS. So we're so excited to have you all here today. Today, what we're going to mostly do is have a discussion, and we'll look at your questions in the Q&A chat. But we're going to start. First, I want to hear from Melanie. How do you, oftentimes to manage post-exertional malaise, we have to counsel people about resting or reducing activity first. How do you counsel patients who feel guilty about resting or reducing activity?
So that's a really good question. I see this so commonly. And I think it's just part of our culture. Our society values productivity. Our society, I see on Facebook all the time, things like, oh, look what my child achieved. And that's great. I'm so happy for that. But, that's how we value people, unfortunately. We equate resting with laziness or, lack of motivation or whatever. And I can tell you this, I really thought about this last night. I thought about it. I cannot think of one single patient who ever told me, yeah, before I got sick, I was just real chill and I was just hanging out. And, I spent time at the beach. I didn't work. No, they were all these people, they were just achieving, they were working hard. They were managing households. They were, many times, not everyone works outside the home, but some, people would have several kids and just, this lifetime, just, it made me tired thinking about all that they did. The patients with this illness are not lazy. So not true. And what I kind of have to do is try to reframe it. Rest is no longer an option, it is a treatment. It is the number one treatment for this illness. There's evidence base for this, right? We know that rest helps the illness. It will help your baseline. It will help to avoid PEM. The more times you're in PEM, the more severe the PEM, you may lower your baseline. So it's really important to protect your rest. It's so, so important. Just like diabetics manage their sugar, you're managing your energy envelope, and it's super important. And, it's not something to feel guilty about. The other thing is I try to educate from day one. Because all of a sudden your paradigm has changed. Your world has changed. The laws of physics have changed for you. The world, I call the other world, because I feel like, I live in a bubble too, right? My daughter has been sick since she was 10. She's now 21. It's been a long time. And the world I live in and the world that people with MECFS live in is different. You just, it's not the same. You can't even relate. I can't relate sometimes to the normal people who, can go to a concert without thinking about it and do those things. So I need to educate. I need to help you understand that things are going to be different. And to try to start thinking of things differently, I try to educate family as soon as possible because sometimes there's just that subtle thing. I learned myself as a caregiver, I would be disappointed. I would feel sad because my daughter couldn't do something. And then that when she could feel that, and that was energy taking from her because she felt like she was disappointing me. She wasn't, the illness was, but I had to learn to to change my behavior, especially when she was in PEM. So I like to talk to family about PEM. What can they do? And give resources to the family to educate them. The school, if it's a child or if the person's in school, the workplace, I like to let everybody know beforehand. The person doesn't need to explain when they're in PEM what's going on, but to try to educate the people around them as well to help them protect their envelope. And I kind of went off topic there a little bit, but
No, you're great.
sorry about that. But yeah, I just want to reframe it as this is a therapy. This is the honestly, and I wish I could say, here's the pill, and this is the best pill you can take, and you can forget about it. Unfortunately, it's not. But if you want to know the number one thing that will help you, it's rest and understanding your energy envelope. So think of it like that. Think of it scientifically. Don't think of it emotionally. And I know that's easy for me to say, and hard for a patient to do, but I want to try to frame it like that.
No, it's such a paradigm shift. And I consistently in the clinic, when somebody's new to experiencing these symptoms, I consistently have people come in and the first thing they are told is to go exercise or to go try to do more activity. And
Yep.
in this case, that's actually just makes things worse because it's reducing activity and resting more that's actually more helpful. So
Mhm.
that's so helpful. Thank you. Amy, you had some slides to share. I'll have you go ahead and share some of those slides about managing PEM.
Yeah. Um, and I think the piece, like looking at what post-exertional malaise is I think let's back up a little bit and just kind of look at it as a whole, and then we can dive into parts of it. Let me share my screen. We're looking at what PEM, post-exertional malaise, is. And what I try to describe is it in pillars. And there are pieces of it that other diagnoses can capture. There can be multi-system responses in other diseases, but PEM has these4 components that need to be kind of satisfied in order to meet that diagnostic piece. And we've looked at the disproportionate response to a stressor. Somebody takes a shower and then they are laid in bed for months. That shower does not equal that same response, and that's part of the condition. That multi-system response, you don't normally have an immune response to taking a shower, but you do now when you have PEM. So looking at those as 2 pillars, looking at the exertion domain, it's not just a physical activity. A shower is physical, but it can be cognitive. It can be sitting on this Zoom call. It can be having a conversation with a loved one. It can be having an emotional response from that conversation, being really happy or excited, or being very sad and distressed. And then sensory and orthostatic. I also want to throw in there weather. So environmental can be exertion. So it's any kind of stressor or trigger to the body. But where I want to look at next is looking at really what that time course looks like. What this is so unique. Somebody that has fatigue may be exhausted and have symptoms immediately, but they don't necessarily have that delay. And that delay of 12, 48, 72 hours later, that makes it so unique to PEM. So that time course is something that is definitely needing to be looked at specifically. And the next slide I just wanted to point out is looking at what some of the warning signs are. And this is where, if we can highlight in the time course, sometimes people will say, I feel like I have a to-do list and I have got 5 things on my to-do list. I don't know exactly which one to do. I really want to take a shower, but I still need to have a conversation with my kids, or I need to order some groceries online. So when I'm working with patients, is I'm having them assess what are the immediate symptoms that could happen around a shower? What are the things that are typically happening for your immediate symptoms? And how does that differ from, say, having a conversation with your kids? You might feel, brain fog or lightheadedness or have air hunger from a conversation, but doing things that are going to be, grooming or self-care might cause your heart rate to be, spiked up to 150, and have lightheadedness or other types of symptoms. So when I'm working with patients, I try to have them look at what are those immediate symptoms or those clues that you're doing too much for that particular activity. And I have them literally look at themselves standing in a pool. If you were to start an activity such as a shower, where is that water level already for you? Is it already up to your shoulders? Because you don't have a whole lot of capacity to tolerate those immediate symptoms. So you are going to hit that doing too much and over your head experience very, very quickly. There's not a lot of space or a lot of functional capacity for that. But if you are going to have a conversation with your kids, you might, because of a cognitive or a social emotional experience, the water level is maybe down to your chest, and you have a little bit more space for that experience. So I'm constantly having my patients analyze what types of symptoms does your body typically respond to with certain activities. Pause with that, looking at what your priority list is. What are the things, where's that water level for each of those buckets or each of those, you're standing in different pools, because how that affects going over your head, doing too much and being overwhelmed will cause an intensity in that crash. That delayed symptom response is your multiple systems of your body, your immune system, your neurological system, your cardiovascular system of your body. That's what's kicking in later for that crash. And so if we can shorten the time of the crash and lower the intensity of the crash, over time you have more capacity. And that's where your function can grow. And so that's what I wanted to highlight with these 2 slides, is that we have a different capacity for different types of activity. And if you can start identifying some of your warning signals, you can have more control and you can have more over time capacity for expanding that volume of function.
Thank you. That's helpful to see, there's that immediate and then that delayed response. And thank you for sharing the characteristics of post-exertional malaise. One of the questions is, what do you call it when it's immediate versus when it's a delayed response? And I think we would say it's still post-exertional malaise. Even though it's immediate, it's still part of that kind of physiology. One of the other questions we had, back to the topic of rest. This is a topic, since you mentioned, Melanie, that rest is one of the most important things. One of the concerns is resting too much, that can make someone possibly worse. Or someone mentioned, I rested all the time and was bedridden and have lost so much muscle. How do you find the balance? Anyone want to tackle that question?
I'm curious what you say about it, Clayton. I have my own opinion. I feel like, especially with kids, right? Because I see kids too, and parents worry. I always feel when I'm first talking about post-exertional malaise with a family, and I'm talking about their children because the parent's not experiencing it, right? And they're trying to, I'm trying to teach them how to help their kid pace. And I'm asking them to sense things that they can't themselves feel. And I feel sometimes almost like I am, it sounds so bizarre what I'm saying, that they're looking at me sometimes like I have three heads, and what are you talking about? I can't, I need to keep my kid home, away from certain activities, and if they go to the party they should only stay half the time or what have you, and I'm really keeping them down. And what I tell them is you can't keep a good kid down. You can't keep people with ME/CFS down, so to speak. If they have the energy, they're going to get up and do. If you feel like you have the energy and you're able to do it, then I absolutely want you to get up and do things with caution, right? And measured, and maybe small steps. And oh, okay, that small step was okay. Let's wait a little bit and see how it goes, and then we can take the next slightly tiny bit bigger step and see where your envelope, because it can change, right? But trying to get up to keep from deconditioning, I think, is worsening you. So I'm curious if that's how the rest of you guys feel.
Yeah, it's a balance. The pacing activity is a balance between rest and activity. And so while there is a component of resting too much can contribute to maybe some muscle loss, we worry more about the complications of experiencing post-exertional malaise and making that worse than we
Mhm.
are concerned about the deconditioning. So it is, but it's individual for each person. There's a certain amount of activity they can tolerate, and um, there are some ways to help use your muscles while you're still resting or in bed, but we really try to measure, is it worth it? It may not be worth it. Amy?
And rest, yeah. And I mean, rest is probably the hardest thing anybody will ever do in their life. I mean, I have patients who are marathon runners, they are extreme sport people, and they will say rest in bed or rest on the couch is torture. And it is psychologically torturous. It is physically, it can be hard on the body. But I just want to point out that there's different types of rest. Not all rest is the same. So patients may need aggressive rest for certain amounts of time, and then that changes into a more focused rest. Are you resting your brain from inflammation, pain? Are you resting your brain fog so that you have clearer thoughts? And Jamie can talk about this piece of it because it's different when somebody is flat in bed with sunglasses on, headphones on, their mind now spirals into darker places. And I want people to have focused rest where maybe they're looking at images so that it captures their attention and their mind doesn't spiral, but they are sensory limited. They don't have sound. They maybe don't have bright lights on. Their curtains are closed, but they can look at photographs or they can look at, cat videos. Is something that gives them at least a little bit of quietness in their brain. But I do feel that we often in the medical field as a whole describe rest as only physical, as only, stuck to the bed. It can be for certain amounts of time, but then other times people can be possibly sitting in a zero gravity chair, but still doing some sort of capturing their social, emotional, cognitive pieces too. Jamie, do you want to speak on this?
Yeah, I think that's a really great way to put that. That's there's lots of different types of rest. I think, for my patients that are more on the mild side, even stopping in the middle of a workday and breathing for 5 minutes and closing their eyes can be a rest period. Kind of more on the severe side, I noticed someone mentioned that it's challenging to sit alone with your thoughts. And I think trying to stave that off can be important. Rest can, like you said, can lead to a really dark place. But also for instance, my experience and some other patients I've talked to who have ADHD, rest and like letting your thoughts spin around in circles is not fun either. So I like to encourage people to prioritize what it is they want to do during a rest period. If you, and you can add things to a rest period, it doesn't have to be completely quiet. But maybe you only have enough energy to do a cognitive activity for 15 minutes. Maybe you're going to prioritize what it is you want to spend that 15 minutes doing. I encourage people to avoid screens if they can, especially things that require a lot of scrolling or have a lot of movement, just because that requires so much visual processing. And also things that are hard to regulate. So stuff that tends to pull you in, like Instagram, tends to be a tricky one for a lot of patients. Taking breaks while you're doing cognitive activities during your rest period is helpful too. So, turn off the music for 5 minutes and have some quiet. Maybe that's the time that you sit up edge of bed or sit up in your bed for a few minutes and kind of reorient to the world, right? So I like to kind of think about what are varieties of things people can do, because rest is an activity in and of itself, but there's lots of ways you can kind of modify that. As far as like cognitive activities you do during rest, because that's what people will tend to go towards, right? Is like, I need something to keep my brain busy. And the busy is not necessarily the goal. So looking for like, what is it that you want out of this time period? Do you want something that's enjoyable, that brings you joy, right? So for me, I really like to draw. I've had a very hard time doing that since I got sick. Requires too much motor skill, too much concentration, too much kind of organizational decision making that I just don't have access to anymore. But I like to doodle, and I can either follow along with someone talking about, kind of walking me through a doodle activity, or I can use stencils, or I can, use different types of media that require very little cognitive effort, but still give me the enjoyment of spending time with that. A lot of my patients really like fiber crafts. That's a really great one. Those like kind of rote activities are good because they require very little brain power. If you're going to choose to listen or watch something, you can modify how you do that. So turn down the volume, listen to your show instead of watching the show. Choose things that are familiar so that your brain doesn't have to interpret new information. Make a playlist of things that you like during PEM so that you don't have to think about what it is you might want to spend that time doing. And then think about positioning while you're doing those things too, especially for things like reading or looking at your phone. That kind of like constantly crane neck, having to use your muscle energy to hold up your head, can also be pretty exhausting. So there's a lot of ways to kind of modify your setup to make that more comfortable. So yeah, that's.
Thank you. That's helpful. Those are helpful tips. Melinda, how have you been able to manage? I mean, you even while managing symptoms, got your doctorate of physical therapy. So I'd be curious how you paced activities and your rest to be able to do that, and how to do activities during rest so that it doesn't breed those negative thoughts.
Well, for me, positioning is very important because of the POTS element for me. So it's imperative that I lie flat several times a day. And I was just thinking about the previous question, what I was taught was, it's good to incorporate a rest break or breaks several times a day, whether you feel like you need it or not. And that's called preemptive rest. And so when you're doing a preemptive rest, as Jamie talked about, you want to eliminate, and Amy both, you want to eliminate as much sensory input as you can, but that can cause you, your thoughts to spin. So some good things to do is we tend to lose contact with our body, like where our body is in space and what we're feeling in our body. And so one good thing, if you can tolerate some audio, is to find a body scan while you're resting, preferably in supine, on your back, legs up if you need to. And a body scan just will start and just gently guide you through where your so you just pay attention. You don't have to do anything. You just pay attention to like what your feet feel like, what your elbows feel like, what your neck feels like, what your nose feels like, things. When I first started doing it, I was really surprised at how I didn't know, like, what my big toe felt like, so that can help, give you a soft focus to do, while you are resting, if you can tolerate listening, to the auditory. For some people, they need to eliminate the auditory. But for me, how I paced myself is I did preemptive resting every day, whether on the good, it's hardest on the good days, that's when you really want to push yourself. But I rested. I tried to eliminate as much symptom stressors as I could. I tell everybody I run the world from this headboard, my bed, because I'm semi-reclined. I eliminate some of the symptoms. I might have my legs crossed, tethered cord symptoms too. My legs might be crossed or stretched out occasionally. I tried to find the time of day, when my cognition was the best, and I would try to put limits on that. I did as much work as I could from my iPad. I was already a physical therapist. I was just an old physical therapist. So, and I just decided to get my doctorate just purely because I wanted to. So I did it all online, which, I found out not only did I have a disability of MECFS, I was an older learner, which they actually put on my disability paperwork to have accommodations for. And the biggest problem was the technology. So my husband had to help me a lot with the tech. So I figured out I could do as much work as possible lying in bed on my iPad. And then when I needed to do something on a laptop or a desktop, I would sit up in a chair for a while and just pace myself. But it's we have to show ourselves grace. It's a push and pull. We try sometimes, 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. But hopefully over time, just eliminating these big pushes and crashes and having a more stable, living, functional place can really help with mood and the feeling like you have some control.
Yes, that's so true. You gain a lot more control if you can structure things out. Like the preemptive rest you mentioned, even when you don't feel those symptoms, because I'll be honest, I am often teaching patients I work with how to recognize the signs that they're going into PEM. But I love what you mentioned about preemptive rest, where you may not be feeling those warning signs or symptoms, but go ahead and take a rest break and space things out throughout the day. Jamie, do you have any tips on cognitive pacing or?
Yeah. I think cognitive symptoms are probably some of the hardest to recognize, especially pre that, sort of thick brain fog place where where things start feeling confused or, even disoriented or the pieces don't fit together, processing is slowed down. I've heard that described lots of different ways. But before that happens, there's usually some warning signs that people are missing. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. We're usually not tuned into cognitive symptoms in general. Our society usually tells us to push past them. Physical symptoms are more obvious, right? We all know when we're in pain. We all know when we're hungry, for the most part. But the cognitive symptoms are ones we tend to ignore. And then on top of that, monitoring cognitive symptoms while you're doing a task is a cognitive task in and of itself. So you're sort of stacking issues on top of each other. Some of the things I tell people to look out for is trouble with auditory processing tends to be a real early one. So delayed response time, trouble kind of catching what questions mean. Some people will tell me, I feel like people are talking, but I don't really understand, or it sounds like English, but I don't know what the words are. Feeling like people are going too fast, asking people to repeat more frequently, feeling fatigued or even irritable about listening can be a good indicator that you're getting overwhelmed. And then on the sort of like speaking or expressive side of things, using a lot more fillers like or like, feeling like you have more word finding problems or it's harder to resolve them, feeling like it's harder to put your thoughts together or keep your train of thought. Those are all kind of ones to look out for. A lot of distractibility, trouble staying on task, feeling confused with a task or doing things out of order, making more mistakes and recognizing them. Those are all kind of things to look out for. And as far as like, these are early warning signs of brain fog. When you get into that, like, I just can't make sense out of anything place, it's all Greek to me, then you've kind of gone too far. I realize that that's, it's a lot to try and pay attention to those things. As far as pacing cognitive activity so that you are trying to avoid that as much as possible, this is a very big topic, and it helps a lot to speak with a speech therapist about some things that work good for you in your situation, but I'll give you some of the kind of best ones. I would say my, first and foremost is to kind of be aware of what are the problems you might run into with cognition as you're working through something. So I like self-questions a lot. Can I do this another time? So can I space this across the week or across the day? Can I identify stopping spots? Can I choose times when my brain is the best? Melinda, you mentioned that, choose times of best attention to do the hard things. If you know that you have kind of a standard time, I will sometimes make a list of, the harder tasks and save them for the next day because I know I'm going to have a better time the next day. Can I share the load with someone else? And maybe that means I do part of the task or I take turns doing the task. It doesn't necessarily mean I don't do it at all. I know a lot of people have a hard time with feeling like they're handing everything off to family. There's some real estate between I do it and I don't do it. So looking for some ways to be kind of creative about that. Or can I do it a different way? Can I read versus listen? Or can I do both of those together? Can I text versus call? Can I use voice dictation instead of typing? Can I do the easy parts first and then leave the hard parts to do one at a time, at a time that I feel better? Do I need to time limit this? Or can I notice when I'm cognitively fatigued during the task? Maybe it's going to be too complicated for me to pay attention to symptoms. And so I need to build in these sort of checkpoints to be able to tell when things are getting too hard. Reducing distractions is huge, especially sensory distractions. For patients that have trouble with auditory processing, any extra noise is going to make processing speech especially more difficult, but any cognitive task more difficult. And think not just about, things like music or TV as background noise, but also environmental noises like fans, running water, traffic sounds, right? So using noise reduction or looking for ways to be in places that don't have quite as much noise can make a difference in how well you do. Breaking tasks into smaller pieces is really helpful, and that can help you with the planning part, right? Well, I'll do this part today and this part tomorrow, or this part in the morning and this part in the afternoon, or this part now, and then I'll see how I feel if I want to keep going, right? So maybe I'll get out my materials first, write down my questions, open the web pages that I need before I make a phone call, right? Using external strategies, so things outside yourself to help with cognition, is also another really key one. My kind of mantra is if you don't have to think about it, don't think about it. That's why we use calendars, right? I don't have my calendar memorized. Most people don't. There's no reason to because you can write it down. So there's lots of ways to use external strategies. Calendars, alerts, alarms are all helpful. I find with alarms, if you overdo it, you'll get alarm fatigue and then you start ignoring them. So you have to be kind of careful about what you're setting alarms for. using different tones for things that you think may be more important. So maybe I have a tone for my meds, and that's the one that like kind of catches my attention. And then the other ones I don't feel quite as, invested in. Writing out steps for a task. So I have noticed that when I go up the stairs to do my laundry, by the time I've gathered up the laundry and gone up the stairs and got it all put in the washer, I'm lost. Like my brain fog is enough to make it difficult for me to figure out what to do next. So I have us like step by steps on my washer to tell me what to do so that I'm not missing steps, and also so that it's really easy for me to do things in sequence without kind of losing track of stuff. I can't tell you how many times I've walked away from the washer and not pushed start. So those kind of things are helpful. Having things have a place to live so that you can find anything. I have like having a bedside cart is a really great example of this, where you would keep the things that you might need when you're in a crash. A lot of people have, what we call sort of a drop zone by the door, where I keep my, keys and my wallet, and, anything that I need to take with me goes in that spot before I leave. So those strategies can all kind of reduce your cognitive load. There's a lot of ways to modify things. From there, it kind of requires a little bit more kind of fine tuning and individualized approach. But those are some really kind of high impact ones to do right off the bat.
Yeah, we might have to put together like a list of those and share
I
it, because
have
that,
many lists.
yeah, just as ideas for pacing and modifying things, because that is so true. There's a lot of things you mentioned that I hadn't thought of before. There's so many creative ideas. And I know, Amy, you have a lot of, like, when people are going to do an event, like go on a flight, or they have an appointment or a social gathering, you also spend a lot of time kind of working with that individual to break down every aspect of it and see how to modify it. Can you share a little bit about how you do that?
Sure. And there was a coffee with a clinician back in December where we went through this
Oh yeah,
really
the
in
holiday
detail.
one. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think, and kind of carrying off of what Jamie so eloquently described, is I really try to work with my patients. So if there is an event, or even if it is just an activity, that is prioritized. But usually if they're like, meeting with me and next month they really want to attend their child's high school graduation, we then pull back and say, what is the golden nugget? Is it sitting in the stands of the auditorium? No. Is it watching your child walk across the stage? Yeah, I mean, that's a big one. So can you then witness in a different way? It could be virtual, unfortunately, but that's an option. Could it be, what is the golden nugget? So let's see that if you could come in, when their name is in the alphabet, you can maybe get pulled in for that amount of time and then leave, have an early exit. So I'm always going through with my patients to say, what's the golden nugget? Yes, you want to hang out with a friend or your sibling, fine. But what is it that you want to communicate with that person? You want social interaction. It can look many different ways. And unfortunately, when you were healthier, you had a lot of choices. And right now, you do not have as many choices. So figuring out all of the different ways to re-envision that golden nugget for each of those events. And it can be, I want to have a sandwich at the kitchen table. That's my golden nugget. So I will say, well, is it eating the sandwich, or is it sitting at the kitchen table? Because sometimes eating and sitting is too much. So I will then keep pulling it apart and saying, like, maybe it is you want to eat your sandwich at the table in a chair and feel part of a family. Fine, we're going to do everything we can to make that happen. But if something has to give, what's the first thing that can be pulled away without you losing that core value of that activity? Another patient of mine really wanted to go with her husband to a wedding. They really wanted to go to this location. They wanted to be there. She didn't know the bride and groom all that well, but she was really excited because she wanted to go with her husband on away. So we pulled it apart and said, you know what? being at that wedding ceremony wasn't a golden nugget for her. For her, it was having a journey with her husband, and it just happened to be the location, that was the wedding. So we, keep pulling those strings. Don't feel like you're trapped by how you see it as a conventional way. And that's what is so, so, so hard, that I think we feel like we have given everything up, and you have given so much. It is grieving. There's so many pieces to this. And I keep on just describing it as it's an onion. And I want you to get to the core, and we can add things back to it. But I want you to get that meaningful activity so so deep in your body that, I want you to have that meaning and that interaction and that value back in your life. And we can then add accommodations. We can add checklists. We can add light dimmers. We can add headphones. We can do things to make it more, accessible for you. But I first want to know, what is it about that event that makes it really important? And then kind of pace it out throughout the week. Where would it fit? If you're going to have a conversation with a loved one, where in your week would it be? Would it be, further down the week schedule from when you have also like a doctor call? Let's separate them, because those are two cognitive things that you don't want back to back. I always call that double dipping. You want to separate so you're not going to double dip, and put things as far apart as you can. If they're both cognitive, separate them. You can do something physical and do other things, but let's pull these apart along your calendar also. So that's kind of how I view special events, or even daily events, for really trying to support patients.
That's great. I think all of you have touched on modifying activities, modifying positioning, and then breaking things apart into smaller tasks, not multitasking, removing some of the distractions and multisensory stimuli that people are receiving. I'd be curious, often Melanie, people ask about treatments for PEM. One person asked about acupuncture, but I want to talk more specifically about just, you mentioned rest being a major treatment, and activity pacing, energy conservation. But what are some other treatments that you find are helpful when somebody is starting to experience PEM, that helps them maybe get out of it faster?
Okay. So first I want to say everybody's different, right? I can name off 2 or 3 things, and there's going to be people that'll say that is the thing that changed everything. And then there'll be a few people that'll say, and that crashed me for the worst crash I've ever experienced. So every single treatment, it's so individualized. And that's what's also difficult about managing this illness, is that there is no, with diabetes, what the first drug you go to is. It's always metformin, and depending on type 1, type 2. But anyway, it's typical. We have a protocol for it. With this illness, it's a trial and pivot. We're going to try something. We're going to try it. I am very conservative. I start really low and slow and advance with little baby steps, because I would much rather, just, if it's something that doesn't agree with the person, I'd rather find out at a much lower dose than at the full dose, right? It's just easier on the person if it's not going to be the medication for them. But first of all, simple measures that anyone can do. Fluids, get your electrolytes in. Now, I know some people will say that's challenging. When I'm in PEM, I can't eat or drink very well, so I get that. Those who can, I know some people don't have great primary care, don't have a great provider, but if you can manage to get IV fluids. Now, for some people, that's too much. Having a person come into their home or going to get them that's going to make their PEM worse. But if you have the ability to have home health come in and do it, sometimes that can be helpful. Just all the wonderful things that Amy and Jamie both said so eloquently about, and Melinda as well, when before we started talking about this particular topic, but things I call it pre-gaming. Put your medicine by your bed. Have that kit that Jamie's talking about by your bed with the things in it, snacks, applesauce, things that you can easily digest, so that you don't have to get up and go prepare your food. Talk about PEM beforehand with your family members. It took me a long time to realize hovering over my child, wringing my hands with tears in my eyes was not helping her. And going in and checking every 5 seconds was not helping her. I had to learn to let her be and just let her be there. And, I'm right outside the door if you need me, or I'm close by, I'm a text away. But, I had to learn how to behave properly. So as adults, you can communicate that better. But when you're well, not when you're or when you're not in PEM, don't try to explain it when you're in PEM. One of the things I noticed, as Jamie mentioned, is just a faraway look. I can see it now. I can see it, that faraway look, and the eyes change. The eyes look, I don't know, I call it fuzzy. They look fuzzy. That is not a very scientific medical term, but I don't know if it's injection of the conjunctiva or what it is, but you look different. So asking your family members to try to kind of watch for those signs, as Jamie said as well. Let's see. So that then, of course, and everybody probably on this call has heard of low dose naltrexone LDN. It's not an emergency medication. It's not something you can take. Oh, I'm having PEM, let me take one. That's not going to help. But if you're on it, it can sometimes improve your PEM resiliency. So you're just less likely to have PEM. So that's something that I have patients on. Dextromethorphan is something that I have patients take at the onset of PEM. Some people prescribe it daily, and that's fine too. Some people take it daily, and that improves their PEM resilience. I tend to do more of a when you need it kind of thing because I fear that maybe you become accommodated to it. So dextromethorphan can be helpful. There's oxaloacetate that people take to try to reduce PEM. Um, I'm trying to think of any other medications. The dextromethorphan and LDN both. I think someone had asked about the brain fog. It can also help with brain fog. Um, Ice at the onset, if you use ice, compression boots, those can be helpful. But again, everything is measured, right? The more severe you are, putting on those boots may be too energy consuming for you. Doing all these things and thinking, oh, I've got 10 things I need to do can sometimes be more energy consuming. The biggest thing for me is stop as soon as you are able and safely able to stop. If you're in the grocery store and you're feeling it, abort mission, check out and leave or leave. Get in your car and get reclined before you drive home. Take 15 minutes reclined in your car, and rest before you go. But stopping as soon as possible. Don't push through. Don't think I just 10 more minutes and I'll get this task done. And again, I know how hard this sounds when I'm talking about it because I can imagine myself. I would be the worst. I would be the worst patient of all. So I understand that what I'm saying is really hard. And sometimes they also say, it's a choice. I've heard that from my daughter before. I don't care. I want to do this thing because, and I'm going to talk to her about the golden nugget now, Amy. That was beautiful analogy. What I call it is I'm a little more, I'm not as eloquent as you. I say, get rid of the extraneous things. That person you don't really like to talk to on the phone, hit mute. Just move on. This is your time. You don't have to do that business. So just get rid of the extraneous things that you don't care to do that aren't enhancing your life.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh no, I think that was a great. Sorry, I think that was great because you mentioned several different options, and I love what you said in that nothing works for everyone. Like I've had patients who have tried acupuncture and who have said it was helpful for some symptoms,
Right.
and then others
Right.
where it flared them. Same with cold. I often tell the majority of my patients that when they're having a flare to put a cold pack on the back of the neck. And that's helpful for the majority of my patients, but I have some that doesn't help and it makes things worse. And so everybody's so unique with what they
So unique.
experience.
And I think a lot of that is mast cell. Acupuncture can be great, but it can trigger mast cell for some people.
Yeah.
And most people with this illness have some element of mast cell activation, whether you know it or not. But so acupuncture can be difficult for that, but then for some people it could be very helpful for pain and that sort of thing. There was something of the ice. The ice can trigger mast cell. Cold
Yeah.
temperature changes can trigger mast cell. So for the person who that's their trigger, that's not so good. So exactly. It's so frustrating, right? Because you'll hear, oh, I'm just like everyone else. I get on the internet and read and look too. What's the latest paper? And then sometimes I look at forums and what are people talking about? What are they saying helps? Because I'm curious. I want to know what's helping other people. I want to know what people with the illness are saying. And
Yeah.
you'll read about something and, believe me, I have a drawer well, no, I don't have a drawer. I have a closet full of stuff, that we trialed and pivoted because it was not the thing that helped. So you'll go through a lot of duds to get to the thing that helps.
Yeah, that's true. And there are some things that help a lot of people, but then there are things that are really, like, for example, I have a lot of patients who the pneumatic compression boots or compression leggings are really helpful, but then some people just can't tolerate that. And so we have to be very creative. Melinda, I wanted to ask you, for those individuals who might have to still work or have to do tasks like daily hygiene, there's some things you have to do. Um, how do you manage PEM and pacing and all this when there's still stuff that has to get done? Like I hear that a lot from people is I can't just rest. Like I have to do some things to survive.
It's really hard. I want to acknowledge that up front that some people are in certain situations where they may still have to work. And again, it's like others have mentioned, if you do have to work, what are your options? When before I came out of work as a physical therapist, I I had a very good relationship. I worked in a nursing home and I had a good relationship with the owners. And they would actually let me go in their ADL room and lie down, like during lunch. And I would put ice packs on. So, can you take a rest break if you have to be upright? Can you put down a yoga mat and lie down on the floor for a certain amount of time? If you are out in the community, can you go get in your car if the temperature is not too extreme and lean the seat back? Take those things. And then at home, again, it's do I take that shower today or do I not take that shower today? I will freely admit that I take one shower a week, and that has, sitting down on a stool, and that has given me so much more energy to do other things, so I know younger patients probably think that's the grossest thing ever. But that was just one thing I decided just took too much of my energy to do every day. And I've not looked back since, and I stay clean, and for those that are severely affected, as Amy talks about a lot, you can use wipes and things like that. Trying to keep your meals as simple as possible. Like everyone's mentioned, keeping them right there with you, trying to delegate if it's possible, but I know for some people it isn't. Trying to find support, whatever that looks like, whether you're in a group or maybe you have someone a lot of my friends do Marco Polos. They record them when they're feeling good, and somebody can watch it when they're able. Just trying to just keep contact with someone, because I know the very severe people, it's really hard. And most of us crave some type of human interaction. And I just want to mention, the PT in me just wants to mention that for me personally, and I know this this is a whole separate topic and a whole can of worms. But the biggest PEM management tool that I personally have found, and lots of others, is heart rate biofeedback pacing. And I know that we're running out of time. Workwell Foundation on their website has a lot of really good handouts on how to pace using a heart rate monitor, and how to determine maybe where your settings could start that you have to play with, depending on your POT symptoms and all that. But I encourage people, if you have not tried using a heart rate monitor to pace for PEM, you might be surprised. At first, you will probably be frustrated because you'll think your energy envelope is bigger than it is. But once you're able to use those numbers, again, Melanie talked about diabetes a lot. It's a biofeedback tool. It's a look, don't stare. It's just something to, I hear the sound, I will see the number. I need to lay down or sit down and rest a few minutes, let my heart rate get back down. It's not something to scare you or to, make you afraid. It's just, again, look, don't stare. But over time, it can be really beneficial in helping you, like activity switching, like doing a physical activity, then maybe going to a cognitive activity, a social activity. It's, lots of trial and error.
Yeah, that's so true. The switching between the types of exertion is important. That was mentioned previously. And then also, like you said, some people, the biofeedback or the alerts can be helpful. I find it interesting that a lot of my patients who have cats or dogs that pick up on their symptoms and will let them know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's so cool. If only we had more animal support. Because they are so good at being able to sense it even better than heart rate and alerts and things. So, but thank you for all those tips. And we're so grateful for you all joining. We hope this was helpful as well. And we know we didn't get to all of the questions, and we see there's a lot of messaging in the chat and Q&A. We wish we could answer all of the questions you have, but we'll try to respond with a document afterwards that tries to answer. But that's why we're doing these sessions, is so that we can answer some of the questions and provide tips or provide a place where you can all chat about your experiences. So thank you for joining us. We hope to see you again for our next session on Wednesday, July 8th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, where we will discuss Chapter 5 titled Sleep Challenges. We'll send an email with the recording and associated resources at the end of the month to those who have subscribed to BHC emails. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.